Welcome to my Genius Hour presentation on social emotional learning. Any research endeavor should start with a basic definition of the topic that one is exploring. And so according to CASEL, or the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, a well-known organization that promotes the use of SEL practices in education, their definition is as follows: the process through which people learn and apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. That being the mouthful that it is, I think it is important for us to focus in on the heart of this definition, that being the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions. Knowing that SEL practices are all about managing and understanding one's emotions, CASEL continues to take their process further and break down social emotional learning into 5 different competencies. These competencies start with self-awareness, then self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. CASEL's model also includes the rings in which SEL practices can be actually taught and implemented. And so not only around the edge do we see classrooms and schools, but we also see homes and communities. And I think this is a really important part of social emotional learning because education and educators cannot be the only realm in which it is being practiced. Going back to the 5 competencies of CASEL's model, I also appreciated that they break down these competencies into more specific and defined sections so that you can really address each separately for each student, depending on where they need particular help. Looking first at self-awareness, this category would be all about a student's ability to not only identify their own emotions, but to have a very accurate perception of self, while also being able to be confident and recognize their strengths as well as their weaknesses. Social awareness is more about perspective taking and empathy, both of these skills allowing someone to embrace diversity and to learn more about what it's like to come from different places, while also building respect at the same time. Self-management focuses more on impulse control, motivation, goal setting, and allowing students to cope and deal with their stress at any given moment. Relationship skills, again, is the heart of it is communication, social engagement, allowing students to build relationships and work together well. And finally, responsible decision making really breaks it down to being able to identify problems and analyze and solve those problems while also doing so in an ethical and responsible way. Now, having heard the more detailed characteristics of the 5 competencies of social emotional learning, the question still remains: why does this matter to me as an educator? Why does this matter in our classrooms? Regardless of where or what or who we teach, I think that most educators can agree on the fact that nowadays, students are bringing more and more problems into the classroom that have less and less to do with school and academics. This means that carving out time for intentional SEL practice is even more imperative so that students can cope and deal with the emotional problems that may be plaguing them so that they can better focus and succeed in an academic setting. There have also been a number of studies done in the last 10 years alone that support SEL practices and their positive impact on students. One such study done in 2011 said that SEL programs enhanced students' behavioral adjustment in the form of increased pro-social behaviors and reduced conduct and internalized problems and improved academic performance on achievements, tests, and grades. Simply put, this stuff works. Throughout the course of my research, I read about a number of other potential outcomes that intentional SEL practices can produce. Some examples are fostering resilience, promoting equity, improving overall mindset, and eliminating stigma. I was particularly interested in this last example of eliminating stigma, as there is a stigma that surrounds mental health and asking for help with one's emotional issues, or even to acknowledge that you might have them to begin with. That being said, I love the idea of using intentional SEL practices in an educational setting with kids, so that at a very young age, you can start promoting what it means to not only acknowledge the importance of taking care of one's mental health, but also to eliminate kind of that awkwardness that might be there when it comes to communicating it with other people and asking for support. As the benefits of social emotional learning are clear, the question then becomes, where do we begin? How do we start this? What does this look like in our schools and in our classrooms? Looking back at the CASEL framework and the approaches they have laid out in this nice visual, the first step is always just instructing kids on those skills and getting the information out to them. The other idea would be to incorporate some of this stuff into teacher practices, not only equipping teachers with the ability to teach such lessons, which would be an awesome use of professional development, but also to allow them an opportunity to practice some of these things themselves. Overall, it would be awesome to see more of this integrated into academic curriculum, but the end goal always has to be, ideally, changing an entire school climate. Regardless of which approach you choose, the outcomes are potentially going to be the same. Like I said, the visual lists some really nice short-term outcomes and then some overall behavior and academic outcomes that could happen as time progresses. When it comes to facilitating the change of an entire school climate, there are tons of programs available for districts or buildings to adopt in order to encourage and promote the growth of SEL practices. Specifically, the 4 I looked at were Yale Ruler Program, the Responsive Classroom Program, the Master Teacher Program, and the Search Institute's REACH program. Regardless of which of the 4 you might choose, CASEL's 5 competencies for SEL remain at the center of all of them. I want to take a short moment to specifically focus in on the Search Institute's REACH program, which stands for Relationships, Effort, Aspirations, Cognition, and Heart. This is actually a program that my school district has implemented more specifically this year in an attempt to incorporate some of these SEL practices within our specific buildings. What has been really engaging specifically about the REACH curriculum is that it's very flexible for all teachers to kind of take and mold into something that they feel is not only suited to their teaching style, but also to the students to whom they're going to give that particular lesson. Some of the topics that we've covered so far are sparks, as in what is your spark, what drives you, what do you love, and what are you most passionate about? Another was core values, and we gave our students intentional time to sit down through an activity and decide what emotional characteristics do they value most. Though implementation has not been perfect or consistent necessarily, these lessons have opened up some really cool conversations with students so far this year. And the success of the lesson really, truly, largely depends on the teacher and whether they are not only buying into the lesson, but whether they are offering some of the same ideas and characteristics and like personal details, I guess, that the students are being asked to share. When implementing SEL practices, whether it be school-wide or in individual classrooms, there are definitely some things we need to remember. The first of those things is that SEL is not just for primary students. Though it may be true that kids of younger ages need more specific skills taught, it is incredibly important that this type of education is something that extends into education of all ages, even into adulthood, as it is never a bad idea for humans to not only know themselves better, but to also relate better with others and to make better choices. A second thing for people to remember is that SEL is not just for low achieving or struggling students. High achieving students are also under a tremendous amount of pressure when it comes to living up to the expectations they or their parents have set for themselves. And really, any student in the middle who maybe just is extra social, that can cause tremendous amounts of anxiety because being social is one thing, but knowing how to navigate it in a healthy way is something different. A third thing it is important to remember is that SEL is not just for narrow focused groups of students. Though it is absolutely true that there are certain categories of students, like those labeled at risk or special needs or in various behavior settings that might need extra special attention when it comes to social emotional skills. It is important that all students be included in this type of education, as it should be a priority that all students are making good decisions, managing their own behavior, finding their own motivation, and building relationships in a positive way with their peers and their teachers. One final thing it is important for people to remember when it comes to SEL is that SEL is not just for students. We as teachers need it too. Throughout my research, I read a number of articles that discussed that when students come to school with trauma or with emotional turmoil, it is inevitable that their teachers are going to kind of sponge some of that into their own life and can almost experience what would be considered secondary trauma. With this being the case, it is extra important that we not only learn social emotional practices so that we can correctly and effectively model those things for our students, but so that we can practice them ourselves and take care of our own well-being so that we are well equipped to deal with the emotional stress that we are going to experience secondary from students. Now, having gone over the emotional competencies included in SEL practices, potential approaches and implementation, various programs that you can implement, or reasons to do so to begin with, the question remains at the end, what can we do today? How can we start this now? By the end of my research, my goal was to come up with a short list of things that we can do on a daily basis in an attempt to promote social emotional practices, even if we are not following a specific program. So this is what I came up with. Number 1, it starts with self. Our own social emotional health and our ability to practice these skills like self-management and empathy and have some self-awareness and problem solving and conflict resolution. All of these things not only do we model to our kids, but when we effectively use them as humans, we make a learning space that is not only safe, but that is open for this type of growth. Secondly, it's okay to start small. I found a list throughout my research called SEL Quick Wins. And basically it comes down to smile, know your kids' names and how to say them correctly, be intentional with what you say and what questions you ask, find ways to control your own emotions and stay calm when you don't feel that way, giving kids options when it comes to discipline and respecting the decision that they make, being culturally competent and culturally aware. All of these little things don't have to be official SEL curriculum, but all of them can help start a ripple effect of change within your own interactions. And finally, the last thing I came up with was always remember the why. No matter if it's just in your classroom or you're implementing a school-wide program, always remember the point of why you're taking the extra time to put some energy into practicing social emotional learning with students. Because at the end of the day, learning how to cooperatively work together, empathize with one another, acknowledge our own strengths and weaknesses, and grow from that learning is going to benefit these students far into the future, more than maybe anything else that we could teach them.